I would like to request all the teachers, students, or staff who might be around this hall to kindly take their seats within the hall. The program is going to start very shortly. in the hall. I would request everyone to kindly take their seats. Today we have Dr. Kevin D. Brown as our chief guest to the program. He is going to deliver his lecture. Very shortly, they are going to be here. The guests are arriving in the hall. I request the registrar to kindly escort them on the dais. I request Dr. Subhash Chaudhary, Honorable Vice Chancellor, to kindly be seated on the dais. Dr. Kevin D. Brown, the chief guest to the program. Dr. Sanjay Dudhe, he is not here. The registrar of the university, as well as the representative of Dr. Nitin Raut, Dr. Advocate Prakash Ramteke, should please kindly take your seat on the dais. Good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of Rashtra Sant Tukadoji Maharaj Nagpur University, I, Dr. Vikas Jambulkar, Associate Professor from Department of Political Science, welcome you all to Rashtra Sant Tukadoji Maharaj Nagpur University's Dr. Nitin Raut International Lecture Series. The dignitaries have already taken the seat on the dais. Today's lecture is the 7th in the series of lectures which is held each year under the prestigious Nitin Raut International Lecture Series on the teachings of Lord Buddha. Before we proceed into the further proceedings of the program, I would like to request you all to kindly rise for the university song, Ya Bharatat Bandhu Bhav Nitya Vasudev.
Ya Bharatat Bandhu Bhav Nitya Vasudev Devarchi Asade Ya Bharatat Bandhu Bhav Nitya Vasudev Devarchi Asade He Sarva Pantha Sampradaya Eka Visudev Matabheda Nasudev Ya Bharatat Bandhu Bhav Nitya Vasudev Devarchi Asade Yo
I would now like to request the dignitaries on the dais to kindly light the lamp. The lighting of the lamp, the sacred convention and symbolism of warding away the darkness of ignorance by igniting the light of knowledge. To kindly welcome Dr. Subhash Chaudhary, Honorable Vice Chancellor, with a sapling. Sir. I would now like to request him again to welcome Dr. Kevin Brown, the chief guest to the program. I again request him to welcome Dr. Sanjay Duda is not here. I will request him to welcome Advocate Prakash Ramteke, who has graced this occasion on behalf of Dr. Nitin Raut. Dear all dignitaries on the dais, friends, colleagues, respectable members of the society, media, and our collegiates from the university. I need to inform you that the prestigious Dr. Nitin Raut International Lecture Series on the teaching of Lord Buddha was instituted by the generous donation received from Dr. Nitin Raut, from the proceedings of which this lecture series is organized. The objective of the lecture series is to understand the teachings of Lord Buddha and its impact on the human world throughout generations till now, and its importance to mankind in the future life. The objective again is to enlighten ourselves with the principles of non-violence and peace, which are the guiding principles of our civilized life. There are 5 themes under which the lectures are organized: social thought of philosophy of Lord Buddha, political thought and philosophy of Lord Buddha, economic thought and philosophy of Lord Buddha, educational thought and philosophy of Lord Buddha, and Dr. Ambedkar's perspective on Buddhism. The lecture series was institutionalized in the year 2015, and since then, each year, the lectures are continuously been organized. Each lecture has turned out to be a gem in the series and have helped in the understanding of the different facets upon which the Buddha has spoken, or on which the thoughts of Buddha had lasting imprint. Till now, there have been outstanding scholars who have graced this occasion, including Venerable Dr. Gyodi Kuchi from Japan, Reverend Zenzi Neo from Canada, Professor G.S. Somaratne from Hong Kong, Professor Scott Stroud from University of Texas, United States, Vandana Ananda from Mahabodhi Society, and so on. Today, we have Dr. Kevin Brown to deliver the 7th in the series of lectures. He will be delivering his lecture on the topic, Struggle Against Oppression of Dalits in India and its Significance for African Americans. The subject gains importance identifying 2 movements that have emerged in the most powerful democracy and the biggest democracy, that is in the US and India, respectively, on this planet. It is significant that both the movements have emerged from the most vulnerable sections of the society, asking the right questions to the might of the mighty in their own societies. In this, they have created powerful articulations of daily normalized, normative and epistemic oppression, inequalities and violence meted out towards these communities. Their responses to these have, however, been constructive by the creation of alternative hermeneutics, ideas and ideals of just life, a normative and moral framework within which these ideals can be realized. The significance of the topic upon which Dr. Kevin Brown is going to enlighten us is the relative importance in which these movements can learn from each other in addressing the issues of organized inequalities. In this case, the Dalit movement in India can really bring significant aspects that can have bearing for the African American movement in the US and bring into light the ways in which these oppression needs and can be addressed, liberating both the oppressor and the oppressed. It is my responsibility to introduce the guest, Dr. Kevin Brown, on this occasion, without which we will be at loss to see how this connection has been building in his thought throughout his academic pursuit. Dr. Kevin Brown is presently Richard S. Melvin Professor of Law, Indiana University, Maurer School of Law, Bloomington, Indiana. He is an Emeritus Director of Hudson and Holland Scholars Program, Indiana University, Bloomington. He is an Adjunct Professor, Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, Indiana University. He is an Adjunct Professor, Department of African Studies, Indiana University, affiliated faculty member of the Dhar India Studies Department, Indiana University, and affiliated faculty member of the Center of the Studies of Religion Ethics Society, Indiana University. He has also been a visiting professor at various universities, including the University of Illinois, Peking University, visiting professor, London Law Consortium, Francis H. Hare Chair of Tort Law, University of Alabama, University of San Diego, visiting scholar, Fulbright lecturer, Indian Law Institute, University, New Delhi, Fulbright lecturer, National Law School of India, and University of Texas School of Law, Austin, at various periods of time. He has completed his college education from BS Indiana University, Kelley School of Business, Bloomington, Indiana, with accounting as his major, and later joined Indiana University School of Law, J.D. Yale College School for his law education. He has taught many courses, given the various institutions he has served, which can be categorized within the broad themes of race and law, constitutional law, law and education, law and development, sports law, seminar courses on anti-discrimination and transnational inequality, inequality and law, civil rights litigation, and legal rights of minors. The courses reflect upon the broader themes he has catered, which include discrimination, inequality, and rights. He has to his credit 2 books, 10 chapters contribution to books, 25 articles in the journals, 5 book reviews, 30 essays in various journals, and 8 encyclopedia entries. He has approximately 120 selected list of papers or talks presented at various occasions, and approximately 100 papers read at the selected list of panels and workshop appearances. His books focus upon the racial and ethnic relations of blacks on affirmative action program and the issues of race and education in the post-disintegration era. Due to paucity of time and to present in short, I may be allowed to take the liberty to classify his contribution in books, articles, and essays in the journals, book reviews and encyclopedia entries, and talks on various occasions, which are on various themes which can be broadly categorized into the issues of race, caste inequalities, and combating racism and casteism in US and India respectively, the hidden apartheid, critical race theory, affirmative action, constitutional law, legal education, and the law schools, and why its pedagogy needs to be changed, comparative study of the blacks and Dalit movements in US and India, and education pedagogy. His contributions are mostly the investigations through the dominant lenses of law, the various issues of race and the relations with blacks, situating the social movement of the Afro-American and the relations with the institutions of state, whether they be educational institutions at all levels, the interpretation by the Supreme Courts on various occasions, predominantly Brown and Board, and the larger issues of equality. Again, he is constantly seen developing the comparative perspective on race and black movement in the US and caste and Dalit movement in India. He is a recipient of various honors and awards. He has also been the founder and director of Indiana University Department of Diversity, Equality, and Multicultural Affairs Summer in Indian program. This program provides undergraduate students with exposure to the African American contribution to the liberation struggles of Dalits, formerly referred to as outcasts or untouchables in India. He is a founder of the Indiana University Summer in Ghana program and founder and director of the Indiana University School of Law Southern African program. There is more to his biodata. I have almost got like 40 pages of his biodata, which I'm not going to read all of it. Right. Before calling our chief guest of the program to deliver his lecture, I would like now to call upon Mr. Advocate Prakash Ramteke to kindly speak a few words on behalf of Dr. Nitin Raut. Advocate Prakash Ramteke.
Good afternoon to all. Namo Buddhaya Jai Bhim. Let me begin the paying to my respect to the memories of the Lord Buddha, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and the Rashtrasanta Tukluji Maharaj. Dignitaries on the dais, Dr. Subhash Chaudhary, Honorable Vice Chancellors, Dr. Kelvin D. Brown, the Chief Guest of the programs, Dr. Sanjay Dure, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Raju Huse, Registrar of the Nagpur University. Dignitaries of the dais, including all the members universities, constitutional basis, the offices, dais, faculties, administrative staffs, head of departments, faculties members, students, and the responsibility citizens of the cities. I am here today on the behalf of the Dr. Nitin Raut, who has the last moment he has to inform me he is not able to come to for the unfortunate circumstances and emergency work that have to appeared which could not be ignored and to bypass since he has a public figure and elected representative of the peoples. And he has the responsibilities of addressing and issues the peoples to governor of the first priorities. I express to regrets on his behalf, as you all the might, you have to sin accepting him to be here on those occasions. Having said, I feel elated and humbled to be present in the company of the august gathering in the premises of the historical and the prestigious institutes. As always has been, the lecture series in the occasions which make the possible to ourselves, submerged in the glories of thoughts, enlightened on the light Lord Buddha's and the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's. I also realize how important the thoughts in shaping the minds and the circumstances of the peoples to be addresses. Today, we have Dr. Kevin D. Brown, who is going to deliver his address on the topic of the struggles against the oppressions of the Dalit in India and the significance for the Africans and the Americans. I do remember the quote Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, in which he said, I quote, the political democracy cannot unless there is lies and the base of the social democracy. What is the social democracy? It means that way of the life which is recognized liberty, equality, and fertility as the principle of the life. I am sure both of the black movements in US and Dalit movement in India has communitized as we well to more learn from each other in our common goal to achieve the social democracies. I am sure we will all the more enlightened and the poeter persons by the end of these lectures. I look forward to these elaborations for the subjects would be learned from the deliberations. I am thankful to the Honorable Vice Chancellor and all the university officials as well as the teachers and the students who play the important role, part of making the lecture series very successfully one. Thanks once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Prakash Ramteke-ji, for gracing this occasion on behalf of Dr. Nitin Raut and speaking out those kind words for us. Now, I would now like to request the Honorable Vice Chancellor to felicitate our guest, Dr. Kevin D. Brown, with sapling, shawl, Gram Gita, and memento, and the statue of Lord Buddha as token of our respect and love. Thank you, sir. I finally would, with great respect and honor, request Dr. Kevin Brown to kindly deliver his address. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. This is really an honor for me to be here, and I definitely want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I certainly want to thank my good friend, Dr. Raut, who I've known for the past 20 years. This is indeed, for me, a great honor to be able to address you today. And let me tell you why. My first trip to India, and hence my introduction to Dalit liberation and the work of Dr. Ambedkar, occurred at the beginning of my time as a Fulbright scholar at the National Law School in Bangalore back in December of 1996. During that first visit, I stayed for 5 months through to May 1997, 25 years ago. Before spending time at the Indian Law Institute in New Delhi, though, I started out in Bangalore, and my office there was next to that of Vice Chancellor of Bengaluru, former Vice Chancellor of Bengaluru Central University, Dr. S. Jaffet, who was then the only law professor of Dalit descent on the faculty. Dr. Jaffet introduced me to the connection between the Dalit struggle and the African American struggle. On the second weekend of my time in Bangalore, he took me to a rally in the coastal city of Bangalore that was attended by 80,000 people. It was to have a profound impact not only on my life, but my scholarship as well. As an African American, there were two aspects about that Dalit rally that stood out in my mind. The first was a sign above the speaker's podium that said, "We shall overcome." "We shall overcome" is the iconic slogan of the civil rights struggle of the 1960s. It was a song that I used to sing in my all-black church every Sunday when I was a small kid back in the 1960s. And the second thing about that rally that struck me was the second speaker. The second speaker started by saying, "I'm a Dalit Panther." We take the name Panther from the Black Panther Party of the African Americans of the United States because we see ourselves as one with their struggle. Even as an African American scholar who had studied our people for 10 years, it had never occurred to me that halfway around the world, our struggle would be having an impact on the struggle of Dalits here in India. And this was true even though I had spent the last 18 months learning about India, learning about her culture, her history, her religions. After that 1996-1997 semester, I didn't come back to India again until 2003, when I came to participate in the Bangalore Initiative. It was at that time that I met Dr. Raut. At that time, one of the pressing issues that was discussed among the Dalit leaders who came together in Bangalore was the possibility of some form of employment discrimination legislation against caste discrimination based on untouchability in the private sector. However, that effort has stalled in the Indian Parliament, but when I get to the end of my remarks, I'm going to come back to this issue about employment discrimination. But as of now, I have participated in dozens of conferences, workshops, and meetings with activists, politicians, community organizers, and intellectuals who are all fighting in one way or another against caste discrimination based on untouchability in India, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and even in Japan. I've had the honor to speak at celebrations of Dr. Ambedkar in Bangalore, Columbia University, London, Mumbai, New Delhi, Patna, and Varanasi. I also have had the privilege of paying my respects to Dr. Ambedkar at his final resting place of his ashes in Mumbai, as well as one of his houses in London, one of his houses in Mumbai, and of course the printing press that he used for so many years. But why I am truly honored today to be speaking here at Nagpur is because of a rare personal connection to Dr. Ambedkar that I have to him at this place. All of us here know of the remarkable work of Dr. Ambedkar and of the conversion of $500,000 to Buddhism that occurred on October 14th, 1956. As it turns out, if you adjust for the time difference between my hometown of Indianapolis, Indiana, and Nagpur, I was born on October 14th, 1956. In other words, when the conversion was occurring, I was being born. Therefore, in a way, I feel I was destined to come here and talk to you today. Now, one question I'm often asked by my Dalit activist friends, why don't African American intellectuals know more about Dr. Ambedkar? And this is a fair question. And it is one that I'm going to try to answer today. But in doing so, it's going to take me into a discussion of how the issues of oppression on the Indian subcontinent have impacted the African American struggle for 200 years. Now, anyone who does transnational inequality scholarship quickly learns that oppression and subordination are local. It depends on the history of a particular group at a particular place at a particular time. Thus, each group that is struggling against oppression is struggling for its liberation by responding to the conditions that it faces. And no one can deny that the history of the United States and the history of India, as well as our cultures, are very different. Therefore, the struggle of African Americans against white supremacy is very different from the struggle of Dalits against caste oppression based on untouchability. But despite that fact, we can learn a lot from each other by comparing our different struggles and these kind of cross-cultural comparisons. Now, no doubt some of those benefits are going to occur to both of our groups. But due to the differences between our two struggles, some benefits will occur to Dalits that will not occur to African Americans, and some benefits will occur to African Americans that will not occur to Dalits. One place where this becomes really, really clear is trying to answer the question, why don't African American intellectuals know more about Dr. Ambedkar? Well, typically, when Indian activists and scholars speak of the knowledge of African Americans about Dr. Ambedkar, they typically talk about a series of exchange of letters between Dr. Ambedkar and W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois, to this day, is still considered the #1 African American intellectual that we ever produced. He helped to found the most powerful civil rights organization in American history, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And from 1910 to 1934, He had editorial control over its magazine, The Crisis. Indeed, The Crisis magazine may very well be the most influential magazine in African American history. The exchange of letters then between Du Bois and Ambedkar that we heard about that occurred in 1946 was not the first time that Du Bois had indicated his knowledge of Dr. Ambedkar. Ambedkar's attendance at the first roundtable conference was also noted in an article that Dr. Du Bois wrote and was published in January of 1931 in an edition of the Crisis magazine. In that edition, Du Bois will compliment the splendid speech of Mr. Ambedkar. Du Bois noted that Ambedkar criticized the British occupation of India because Dalits were in a loathsome condition when the British came 150 years ago and nothing had changed. They were just as badly off today. In order for me then to explain to you how Dr. Ambedkar's speech was understood by the African American community, I have to go back into history 200 years to talk about the long relationship between African Americans and the Indian caste system. Even though South Asians did not start to arrive in the US in significant numbers until the 1850s, knowledge of the caste system had preceded them. Thus, when thinking about the situation of African Americans in the 19th century, it's important to note that abolitionists, including the legendary Frederick Douglass, were comparing the condition of blacks to the Indian caste system as early as the 1830s. As a result, there is more than a 200 or almost a 200-year history of equating the struggle of my people with the Indian caste system. Perhaps the most significant effort before the American Civil War of using the analogy of the oppression of the caste system to the condition of blacks occurred in 1849 in America's first school segregation case, Roberts versus Boston, which was decided by the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, the oldest appellate court in North America. In that case, Sarah Roberts, the little black girl, wanted to go to the nearest school to her, which was a school that did not let blacks in at the time. Sarah Roberts was represented by the legendary senator from Massachusetts, Charles Sumner, who would go on to become one of the major voices in the formation of laws after the American Civil War. In addition, Sarah Roberts was represented by the first black attorney in the state of Massachusetts. In the brief that those two attorneys put together, they made several references that school segregation was like the Indian caste system. Gunnar Myrdal points out in his epic book, An American Dilemma, that after the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed by President Lincoln, stopped the practice of referring to black people as slaves. Therefore, Americans needed a new term to describe blacks. The new term was freedmen, but to describe the status of blacks, the use of caste became all more important and all more frequent. Now, right after the ratification of the 13th Amendment in 1865, that's the amendment that abolished slavery in the United States, the U.S. Congress began to deliberate a significant civil rights bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This was the first anti-discrimination measure passed by the U.S. Congress, and that act is still in effect today. During the congressional debates of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, several members of Congress asserted that the purpose of the act was to prevent the development of a caste system in the U.S. that was like the caste system that existed on the Indian subcontinent. Indeed, the very same Congress that passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866 will also pass out the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is the amendment that contains America's Equal Protection Clause, which is our constitutional clause requiring equality. As with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, several members of Congress pointed out the purpose of the 14th Amendment was to prevent the development of a caste system in the U.S. Now, if I were to think about legal opinions written by justices in the United States, there's one opinion that would stand out above all others. It was an opinion written in 1896 in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is a critical U.S. Supreme Court case because this is the case where the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the doctrine of separate but equal. 8 of the justices agreed that that doctrine was consistent with our notions of equality. 1 justice disagreed. And that justice's opinion is without doubt the single most recognized opinion ever written by a justice in the United States. In that opinion, in that passage that is quoted over and over, Justice Harlan said, "In the view of our Constitution, in the eye of the law, there is in this country no superior or dominant ruling class of citizens. There is no caste here. Our Constitution is colorblind." Now, all these examples are intended to make it clear that up through the 19th century, the treatment of African Americans in the U.S. was analogized to the caste system on the Indian subcontinent. And that comparison continued on into the 20th century. For example, the Aryan origin theory was used by North Indians to argue in American courts that they were actually Caucasians. Because at the time, the only way to become a naturalized citizen in the United States was to either be a descendant of the Caucasian or African race, and these North Indians argued that they were descendants of Aryans, and therefore they were Caucasians, and therefore eligible for U.S. citizenship. They actually won several of these lawsuits until 1923, when our U.S. Supreme Court put a firm end to that by saying, "It may be true that the blonde Scandinavian and the brown Hindu have a common ancestor in the dim reaches of antiquity, but the average man knows perfectly well that there are unmistakable and pronounced differences between them today." The NAACP, which, as I said, was our most powerful civil rights organization, in its founding constitution in 1909 specifically stated one of its objectives was to prevent the development of caste. And even today, many advocates for black equality in the U.S. will talk about the U.S. as having a caste system. However, the direct comparison of the condition of African Americans to Dalits really didn't begin until we get into the 21st century. So the real question is, why didn't it happen earlier? What happened earlier to prevent a direct comparison of African Americans to Dalits? Because if that had been done, Dr. Ambedkar would be better known within the African American community. So that takes us then to the beginning of the 20th century. As the 20th century dawned, black intellectuals developed a new form of transnationalism that was based on the concept of an alliance of people of color against white supremacy. Color cosmopolitanism viewed the discrimination of the black community in the U.S. as simply the local aspect of a global struggle against white supremacy. And the triggering event for this new international perspective was the Japanese defeat in 1905 of the Russian army. At the time, Russia had the largest standing army in the world. Their defeat by Japan had global implications, especially for people of color throughout the world. Indeed, W.E. Du Bois would say about the defeat of the Russians, that for the first time in 1,000 years, a great white nation has measured arms with a colored nation and been found wanting. The Russo-Japanese War marked an epic. The magic of the word white is already broken, and the color line in civilization has been crossed in modern times as it has in the great past. The awakening of the yellow races is certain. The awakening of the brown and black races will follow in time. No unprejudiced student of history can doubt. Du Bois was not the only black leader who praised Japan for their defeat of Russia. Virtually all significant black leaders at the time praised the Japanese for defeating the Russians. But this also introduced a new idea into the African American consciousness, and that was the idea that a global alliance of people of color could defeat white supremacy. So it's in the 25 years after the Japanese defeat the Russians that the African American community becomes increasingly aware of the Indian freedom fighters. Though Indian freedom fighters Tarknath Das, Syed Hussein, Kumar Ghosh, and Haridas Muzumdar all came to the United States, special mention should go to Lajpat Rai, who was known in the U.S. as the Lion of Punjab. Rai visited the U.S. from 1914 to 1919, but he made a point of getting to know the important black leaders of the day. Rai studied America's racial condition, and as a result, he became good friends with several leading African American intellectuals, including Booker T. Washington, John Hope, and W.B. Du Bois. Rai and Du Bois developed a special relationship, in part because both of them came to realize that while African Americans were fighting white supremacy in the form of segregation and disenfranchisement, India was fighting white supremacy in the form of British colonialism. The notion that Indian freedom fighters and African Americans were on the same side of a global struggle against white supremacy became then the new dominant way that the African American community began to look at issues of oppression on the Indian subcontinent. In addition, African Americans could also see that white Americans discriminated against Indians in the U.S. in very similar ways to the ways they discriminated against us. However, conditioned by the long use of the caste analogy, as renowned black historian Gerald Horne put it, the question of untouchables was the hallmark of the relationship between the Black America and the Indian freedom fighters. Many Indian freedom fighters that African Americans knew well told them that they could not address the curse of untouchability until India obtained independence from Britain. Indeed, not only was Rai a member of Arya Samaj and made a point of talking about the end of untouchability, so did the Gator Party in the United States. Gandhi then started to get known in the United States by the African American community in 1921. In May of 1924, Gandhi published a statement in the New World, a paper under the control of Marcus Garvey, where the first line said, "Removal of the curse of untouchability among Hindus." And in 1929, Gandhi wrote a message to the American Negroes that was published in Du Bois's Crisis magazine. In the message, Gandhi urged the 12 million Negroes not to be ashamed of being the grandchildren of slaves, and that there was no dishonor in being the grandchildren of slaves. The dishonor was in being a slave owner. Thus, by the time of the first roundtable conference, most African American leaders believed that the Indian freedom fighters were seeking a dual victory. They were seeking not only to overcome white supremacy by gaining independence from Britain, but once that independence was gained, of eradicating the curse of untouchability. It's the fact that the African American community saw the Indian freedom fighters as engaged in this double struggle for victory that made the Indian freedom fighters cause such a great one for African Americans to believe in, because not only would we be backing a group that was fighting white supremacy, which was our major enemy, but we would also be backing a group that had committed to us that they were going to eradicate one of the most extreme forms of oppression the world has ever known, caste oppression based on untouchability. And indeed, it's caste oppression that is something that the black community had identified with for over a century by the time of the first Round Table Conference. So, one of the few times that I have found that Dr. Mbekwer's name was referred to by the black press was his appearance at the first Round Table Conference. In January 1931, in an article written by Du Bois specifically talked about Mbekwer's speech at the first Round Table Conference. And this is what Du Bois wrote. "There is the splendor of India in London, prince and untouchable, Muslim and Hindu, still standing shoulder to shoulder when England counted upon disunity and mutual jealousies and hatred to perpetuate its tyranny in India. This was a splendid speech by Mr. Mbekwer. He said, when the British came to India 150 years ago, we were in a loathsome condition. We could not draw water from the wells. We could not enter the temples. We could not serve the police force. We could not serve in the army. And what happened? He said nothing. We are just as badly off now as we were before the English came." So the problem really between an understanding of Dalits and African Americans starts with the different interpretations of this splendid speech by Mr. Mbekwer at the first Round Table Conference. To do that, I need to explain to you then how was African Americans understood the speech. For us, the British were always the enemy. They were the ones who were responsible for our slavery. As Malcolm X would put it, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. And it was the English settlers who dropped the rock on us. So the black press understood what Mr. Mbekwer said within the context of our 300-year struggle against white supremacy. 3 points then to make on what the black press understood about Dr. Mbekwer's speech. The first, as Du Bois makes clear, is that Indian independence is furthered by uniting the different factions that were demanding independence from Britain. One of the key cultural values of African Americans is that our strength comes from our unity, and that whites seek to divide us in order to maintain their control over us. A second point from Du Bois's article is the hypocrisy of the British. Du Bois was pointing out that the British did not care to give India independence or to eradicate untouchability. The British were merely seeking to divide the Indian freedom fighters in order to maintain their control. And the third point that the black community understood from Du Bois's speech implies that the elimination of caste discrimination based on untouchability would have to wait until independence. Now, the aftermath then of the second Round Table Conference further strengthened Gandhi's reputation in the African American community. As we all know, at the second Round Table Conference, both Gandhi and Mbekwer claimed to speak for the Dalits. 2 weeks after the second Round Table Conference ended in failure, the New York Age, a distinguished black newspaper, published a letter by Dr. Mata Singh in December of 1931. Singh's letter discussed Dr. Ambedkar's claim to represent Dalits and opposition to Gandhi. The author noted the very statements that Ambedkar had made during the roundtable discussion, which Du Bois had quoted. Singh went on to say that Ambedkar's presence at the first roundtable conference was not to represent the untouchables, but the British government at whose request he went there. And he certainly was loyal to them, and in a well-planned scheme of the government, he tried to usurp Gandhi's power. Other articles in the black press picked up this basic point too. So when the Pune Pact was signed, the black press saw Gandhi fast unto death as one that would help Dalits. The rationale, as it was understood, was the end of untouchability had to wait till Indian independence. Indian independence would not come without Indian freedom fighters being united. But the other thing about the Pune Pact is that we as African Americans could not have understood the difference between separate electorate and reservations for legislative bodies. You see, in 1930, we had virtually no political power. 80% of blacks lived in the South where they could not even vote. And in America, separate electorate has never been anything even suggested. So we couldn't understand the difference between separate electorate and legislative reservations. After Gandhi's fast unto death that led to the Pune Pact, Gandhi was revered in the black press. His reputation at this point was so high that he was even being compared to Jesus Christ. In February, and because of that, for many significant black leaders, a visit to India to meet with Gandhi became absolutely necessary. And the black leaders who came to India to meet with Gandhi were not ordinary black leaders. These were the teachers of the entire civil rights leadership of black America. First person I want to mention who came to visit Gandhi was Howard Thurman. Thurman was the dean of the Memorial Chapel on the campus of Howard University and a professor of religion there. Howard University is considered the top black historical college in the U.S. And Thurman has been called a teacher of teachers, a preacher of preachers, an activator of activists, and a mover of movers. He was the spiritual guide to many significant black leaders in the civil rights movement, including James Farmer, Marion Wright Edelman, Baynard Rustin, and Jesse Jackson. A second African American who came to visit Gandhi was Channing Tobias. Channing Tobias would go on to become the chairman of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, this significant civil rights organization. He was also an appointee to President Harry Truman's Committee on Civil Rights. And the third African American leader who came to see Gandhi was Benjamin Mays. Mays was the dean of the School of Religion of Howard University at the time. That is a position that would eventually be offered to Martin Luther King Jr., and he would turn it down. But Mays would go on to serve as president of Morehouse College from 1940 to 1967. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. graduated from Morehouse College. During the time that Mays was president, he taught and mentored many influential African American activists, including Julian Bond and Maynard Jackson. And indeed, Benjamin Mays actually gave the eulogy for Martin Luther King Jr. at his funeral. So where are we today? With independence, we all know that the Indian Constitution, whose chairman of the committee was Dr. Ambedkar, included several provisions that attacked untouchability. At the ratification of the Indian Constitution, Dalits had several rights at that time that African Americans did not possess. But over the past 70 years, since independence, Dalits have learned the same valuable lesson that we as African Americans learn. Simply changing the law does not change what's in people's hearts. As you've come to find out the persistence of caste discrimination, we have found the persistence of white supremacy. So while India did gain her independence from Britain, it did not comply with the second of the requirements that brought its support of the African American community, and that was truly to end the curse of untouchability. To me, then, the role that I should occupy as an African American is in pursuit of that second goal, the eradication of untouchability. Thus, my role is both to assist Dalits in their struggle and to remind caste Hindus of their commitment to the African American community to abolish untouchability root and branch. Now, as I indicated, after that 1996-97 semester, I didn't come back to India until 2003 to participate in the Bangalore Initiative. At that time, one of the pressing issues was the need to enact employment discrimination legislation to prevent caste discrimination on untouchability in employment. I want to report to you today on the work that I've been doing for the past 2 years to advance the cause of the fight against untouchability in the U.S. However, recall that I talked about, you may not know this, but right now there are over 4 million South Asians in the United States right now. And they have brought with them their culture, including the caste system. Now recall that I talked about how the Congress that passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 made several references to that act being an anti-caste act. In other words, if you look at that act, which is still one of America's primary civil rights statutes, what it means is there's incredibly powerful legal arguments that the caste discrimination that is carried on in the United States against Dalits is a form of race discrimination under American law now. That would mean that Dalits would actually have protection now against caste discrimination in employment and housing discrimination in the United States. I've been working with a group of lawyers, and we have been bringing this out in American courts. And our hope is in the next 2 to 3 years, you will begin to hear more and more about how American law recognizes caste discrimination as a form of race discrimination and therefore illegal in the United States. Now, my personal sense is as this progresses, caste Hindus in the United States right now are held in very high regard. Their average income is double that of whites. They are also twice as likely to have college degrees. But the one serious threat to their reputation would be an understanding of the discrimination that comes from the caste system. They too will have a tremendous incentive to work within the Indian community, at least in the United States, to prevent caste discrimination based on untouchability. And our hope would be that they will become more important allies to work on caste discrimination here in India. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me this chance to make these remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kevin Brown, for providing us those insights which led to the understanding of Dalit movements within the United States, Afro-Americans, and why, and how do we address this question, why the African American could not recognize Ambedkar in the initial days of the movement. I would now like to call upon the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Subhash Chaudhary, to deliver his presidential address.
With great homage and tribute to Lord Buddha, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, and Rashtra Sant Tukaji Maharaj, here again I thank Dr. Kelvin Brown for delivering a very nice comparison and lecture. So, chief guest or the speaker of today's function, Dr. Kelvin, the Advocate Prakash Ramtekiji, Registrar Dr. Huse, Dr. Thorat, former Registrar Puran Meshram, Dr. Puran Meshram, professors, dignitaries of the dais. Here we are here for Dr. Nitin Raut International Lecture Series on Teaching of Lord Buddha with the theme Struggle Against Oppression by Dalit in India and its significance for African and Americans. Dr. Kelvin has very systematically put forward the historical relationship of African American to liberation struggle of Indian subcontinent. Actually, it is really a remarkable initiative taken by Dr. Nitin Raut, Honorable Minister of Energy of Maharashtra and Guardian Minister of Nagpur. Through such international experts, we can understand the spread and importance of Lord Buddha's teaching across the globe. So these lectures are being continued since last few years, and I think this is the 7th lecture in series. Through such, because of some unavoidable circumstances, we could not organize 2 lecture series in COVID situation also. I hope the relationship or the background or the picture put forward in front of you by Dr. Kelvin will really give the insight that how the Dalit movement is more dominant here in India, and its significance to other countries also is that much required as per his lecture. And such type of thoughts, such type of study is really required to understand up to how much extent we must proceed and we must spread the thoughts of Lord Buddha, and as well as the work done by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar for such movement, because such oppression occurs in many countries and it is the local problem, but some are similarities there. So no doubt it is either in India it was the caste-based discrimination, but in some other country, just in US it is the color-based discrimination. So now in other countries also such type of discrimination may be there. We can understand through such lectures, and these lectures would be continued in future also. University is organizing this international lecture on the theme, and I hope everyone might have been benefited with this lecture. In future also, such type of lecture will be continued by the university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for giving a very brief but very important message to all of us. I now move towards the finale of this program. I would like to request the Registrar of the University, Dr. Rajiv Huse, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
नमस्कार. डॉक्टर नितीन राऊत आंतरराष्ट्रीय व्याख्यानमालेसाठी व्यासपीठावरील मान्यवर व श्रोतागण आवर्जून उपस्थित राहिल्याबद्दल आणि या व्याख्यानमालेचे यशस्वी आयोजन केलेल्या सर्वांप्रती कृतज्ञता व्यक्त करण्यासाठी मी आपणासमोर उभा आहे. आपल्या नागपूरचे पालकमंत्री तथा महाराष्ट्र राज्याचे ऊर्जा मंत्री डॉक्टर नितीन राऊत यांनी दिलेल्या दाननिधीतून सुरू करण्यात आलेल्या व्याख्यानमालेनिमित्त राष्ट्रसंत तुकडोजी महाराज नागपूर विद्यापीठाच्या वतीने डॉक्टर नितीन राऊत आंतरराष्ट्रीय व्याख्यानमालेचे आयोजन करण्यात येत आहे. या व्याख्यानमालेप्रती इंडियाना युनिव्हर्सिटी मॉरर स्कूल ऑफ लॉ ब्लूमिंग्टन USA येथील ऑनरेबल डॉक्टर केविन डी ब्राउन, शिक्षणाच्या विकासाकडे दूरदृष्टीने पाहणारे व समाज विकासाच्या शक्यता निर्माण करणारे आणि आपल्या अभिजात शैक्षणिक बांधिलकीच्या जाणीवेने त्यांनी स्ट्रगल अगेन्स्ट ऑपरेशन बाय दलित इन इंडिया अँड इट्स सिग्निफिकन्स फॉर आफ्रिकन अमेरिकन्स या विषयावर सुरेख असे व्याख्यान गुंफलेत. त्याबद्दल विद्यापीठाच्या वतीने मी त्यांचा मनपूर्वक आभार मानतो. यासोबतच विद्यापीठाचे सन्मान्य कुलगुरू डॉक्टर सुभाष चौधरी सर यांनी आपल्या अध्यक्षीय भाषणातून विचार मांडताना आपणाला बहुमोल मार्गदर्शन केले, त्याबद्दल त्यांचे आभार मानणे मी माझे कर्तव्य समजतो. तसेच आजच्या कार्यक्रमाला आवर्जून उपस्थित राहिल्याबद्दल मी माननीय ॲडव्होकेट प्रकाशजी रामटेके यांचेही आभार मानतो. विद्यापीठाचे निमंत्रण स्वीकारून आजच्या डॉक्टर नितीन राऊत आंतरराष्ट्रीय व्याख्यानमालेला मेणबत्ती जळत आहे आवर्जून उपस्थित राहिल्याबद्दल डॉक्टर सुखदेव थोरात, डॉक्टर पूरन मेश्राम, विद्यापीठ प्राधिकरणीचे सदस्य, सर्व अधिष्ठाता, सर्व विभाग प्रमुख, सर्व संचालक, शिक्षक, अधिकारी, कर्मचारी व सर्व निमंत्रित श्रोत्यांचे मी विनम्रपणे आभार व्यक्त करतो. आमच्या विद्यापीठाच्या सर्व गतिविधींना न्याय देणारे पत्रकार बंधू व प्रसारमाध्यमांचे प्रतिनिधी आवर्जून इथे उपस्थित आहे, त्याबद्दल त्यांचे विद्यापीठातर्फे आभार मानतो. राज्यशास्त्र विभागाचे प्राध्यापक डॉक्टर विकास जांभूळकर यांनी व्याख्यानमालेचे सूत्रबद्ध संचालन करून आम्हाला सहकार्य केल्याबद्दल मी त्यांचे मनपूर्वक आभारी आहे. कार्यक्रमाच्या आयोजनाकरिता प्रत्यक्ष व अप्रत्यक्षरित्या ज्यांनी सहयोग दिला त्या सर्वांच्या प्रती मी शतशः ऋणी आहे. एकदा आपण सर्वांचे पुनश्च आभार व्यक्त करतो. धन्यवाद.
Thank you, Dr. Huse, sir. Finally, I now, this program is coming to an end. But before that, I request all the audience as well as the dignitaries on the dais to kindly rise for the national anthem. with the permission of the chair, I declare this proceeding as over. The arrangement of tea is made outside this hall.